I'm Tom Baker, this is Chasing Cars, and these are two super SUVs for when you don't want a Mercedes AMG or a BMW M car. If you're looking beyond Germany's typical performance building car manufacturers, congratulations, because while BMW M, Mercedes AMG and Audi Sport build some fantastic cars that we love driving, these two here just have a little bit of extra panache to them, don't they? The SUVs I've brought along with me today are in the orange, the recently updated Jaguar F-Pace SVR, and in the white is, of course, it requires no introduction, the Alfa Romeo Stelvio Quadrifoglio. Now, both of these super SUVs are European, but they're not German. The Stelvio is built in Italy, the Jaguar F-Pace is built in England, and of course, these two offer you a luxury alternative to the sorts of vehicles that we see everywhere in well-heeled suburbs of Australian cities. Just stand on a street corner and count the amount of AMG GLCs you see. And then next time, think about when was the last time I actually saw a Stelvio Quadrifoglio or an F-Pace SVR on the road. In today's video, we're going to be finding out whether there's a reason for that, or whether these two super SUVs are being overlooked by buyers that could be lapping up their combination of huge power and supple ride quality, because that's something these two actually share and it sets them apart from rivals like the GLC 63 and the BMW X3 and X4 M, both of which can hammer, but they also hammer your back, requiring extensive chiropractic visits. These two are simply not like that. So in today's video, the first thing we're going to do is take them for a drive and see which one drives better, because that's the whole point of buying a top-of-the-tree performance SUV. Then we'll check out the interiors, the back seats, and compare the running costs before finding a winner. Before we get started, hit subscribe below. But just before the wheels hit the road, let's check out what powers these super SUVs, because that's really what it's all about. So here in the Jaguar corner is a fabulous engine, a 5-litre supercharged V8. The kind of engine that certainly isn't long for this world, and we know that in the case of Jaguar Land Rover, because the day before we filmed this, so yesterday in my universe, the new Range Rover was unveiled, and it doesn't have the 5-litre supercharged V8. Instead, Jaguar Land Rover have signed an agreement with BMW to source their 4.4-litre twin-turbo V8. Also a great engine, but this is a classic. 405 kilowatts of power, so enough, I think we'd all agree, and 700 Newton meters of torque. Massive grunt, but the F-Pace SVR is over 200 kilograms heavier than the admittedly quite light Stelvio Quadrifoglio. That being said, it uses all of this grunt to maximum effect because it only trails the Stelvio by 0.2 of a second to 100 at 4 seconds, and it has a higher top speed. You always know a vented bonnet means business, and underneath this really sculptural bonnet of the Stelvio Quadrifoglio, which is a much lighter bonnet by the feel, lies another great engine, 2.9-litre twin-turbo V6. I've been saying erroneously for years that it was a cut-down Ferrari V12, but as our faithful commenters have let me know quite strongly this time, it is actually a Ferrari V8 with 2 cylinders lopped off. But who's complaining? Beautiful looking engine. I mean, just look at it. It looks like something out of science fiction. It looks like an alien to me. And while the outputs are down on the hammer of a V8 in the F-Pace, the Alfa Romeo is a quick car. 3.8 seconds to 100. That's because the engine produces 375 kilowatts of power and 600 Newton meters of torque, which is still plenty, but with some absolutely phenomenal throttle response, as we'll see shortly. Now, both of these SUVs are all-wheel drive with a strong rear bias, but where the Stelvio really shoots its shot is that the tare mass of this car is actually under 1,800 kilos, which for a mid-size SUV with a really big donk is actually quite something, because the Jag is just over 2 tons. Right, straight behind the wheel then of the Jaguar F-Pace SVR. The coolest looking F-Pace, the variant that sits at the top of the F-Pace lineup, the F-Pace that is truly full fat, and one of the last cars that will receive JLR's 5-litre supercharged V8 that we know is being pushed out the door now that the new Range Rover has been unveiled with a BMW 4.4 V8. There's always the hope of a stay of execution and stuff, and there are still plenty of markets in the world that don't have seriously hardcore emissions regs, Australia being one of them. But my best advice to you would be, if you're the kind of person that looks at JLR's 5-litre supercharged V8 and goes, I must own that engine once in my life, and you want to own it from new with a warranty, now's the time. Now is the time. What's interesting though is that in Alfa's range, there's the Giulia, right? Same engine as the Stelvio Quadrifoglio, 2.9 twin-turbo V6, but in a much more lithe sedan format. Jaguar no longer have that kind of option in their range. There's no XE SVR, there's no XF SVR. Their sedans don't really sell massively. In fact, they sell in very small numbers in Australia. They once sold very well, even as recently as a decade ago. And while you could get an XE Project 8 in some markets, that car never came to Australia. So basically your choice here, if you want an engine like the 5-litre supercharged V8, is, at least in the Jaguar lineup, a choice between the F-Type, the very compact coupe and convertible sports car, or an F-Pace SVR, no sedan. So I guess it makes life a little bit easier, or at least it makes the choice easier, because in the Alfa Romeo lineup, I'd still be strongly tempted to go with the Giulia Quadrifoglio rather than the Stelvio Quadrifoglio. Anyway, over to how this car drives. So I'm just bombing down this narrow little country lane in the Blue Mountains, west of Sydney, around this hairpin. Gee, you know, it's big. It's a big car. There's no avoiding it. It's a wide car, and yet, you know, to borrow a cliche, it just wraps around you. It does not feel its width. If you look over to the far corner of the car, you know it's big, but it does have this uncanny ability to feel a lot more modest in terms of size. Right, now that we're out of that village, let's put the anti-social exhaust on, flick it into dynamic mode. There we go, dynamic. Confirmed, as it says. Let's go. Holy hell. Man, this is a great engine. Being supercharged is just instant underfoot. There's no turbo lag because there's no turbo. Instead, you just get the full whack, the full 700 Newton meters. Just under your boot, as this engine surges towards 405 kilowatts of power. And listen to the noise. There's mean induction sound, and then there's that beautiful fruity exhaust emitted from this car's quad pipes that just looks so menacing. Oh, sounds good, feels good, and it's quick. 4 seconds to 100, that's fast enough for most of us. The Alfa is a little quicker though, and lighter. That being said, the lightness point is a bit of a red herring. Australia has so many back roads just like this one, not particularly well finished, beautiful scenery, but a rough road. And actually the F-Pace feels settled. It is heavier. It can't change direction quite as alacritously as the Stelvio, but it's really planted over the very, very, very so-so surface of this road. It just irons out the bumps. It just steamrolls the bumps, basically. I mean, 2 tons isn't that bad. There's plenty of SUVs out there that are way heavier than this, but you know, it basically just plows on through mid-corner bumps, non-issue. Now the steering is very different in the Jaguar compared to the Alfa. The Alfa has relatively light, quick steering, feels great. Probably the best steering of any SUV I've tested. The Jaguar still has fairly good steering for the class, it's just a little sludgier than the Alfa. There's a little bit more resistance initially, there's more of a dead spot on center. It's only small, but you can see I can twiddle the wheel a little bit there and I get no result. So the lock sort of has to be wound on a tiny bit more than the Alfa, but it's still a natural ratio. It's not quite as quick as the Stelvio in terms of ratio, but it's very intuitive and you certainly get the result that you expect when you start, you know, winding on lock basically. Huge grip from the Pirellis, staggered 295s at the back, just massive, expensive to replace, but loads of traction while they're in good shape. Level ride too. We have adaptive dampers in this car, but we just have this lovely level ride, even in dynamic now with the dampers firmed up, as they say. No crashing, just really strong body control. If I smooth it out by going to comfort, still excellent body control, but just a little bit more sort of warmth from the chassis as it really just irons off those edges really nicely. Lovely ride, incredible ride for a car with 22-inch wheels, just insane. It's no mean feat to achieve a ride quality this good on wheels so enormous, on tyres so fat, and with a suspension tune that exacts phenomenal body control. Well done, Jaguar. This car easily eclipses the balance of an AMG GLC 63, or especially the way over stiff BMW X3 M. This is lovely, really lovely. It's not quite as delicate or as dancer-like as the Stelvio Quadrifoglio, but this is a fantastic touring car and a great commuter too, having done a bit of that this week. Comfy, luxurious, quick, fast, sporty, supple. Gee, I'd have one, and I'm not an SUV guy. How about that? But the Alfa is a different animal again. Let's go there. So, into the Stelvio, and off we go. Yeah! So different out of the box, and the first thing is the noise of the donk. I mean, neither of these SUVs sounds bad. They sound great, but listen to the zest. Listen to the metallic zing in the 2.9 twin-turbo V6. So different in character to that bassy meat of the Jag's 5-litre, and it just keeps going. The gearbox tune in this car is just fantastic. Interestingly, the same basic underlying gearbox, but as always, the devil is in the tuning, and they're both pretty good. It's just that the Stelvio really detects when you're up it and you want to stay up it, and it's judging all these sensors, and it just knows to kind of hang out at the top of the rev range for a couple of seconds more while you're enjoying that sound. Really nice. And of course that sound emanates from the 2.9 twin-turbo V6, 375 kilowatts of power, 600 newton meters of torque. So what is that, 30 kilowatts down on the F-Pace SVR and 100 newton meters? So the torque is like substantially lower, but the car is substantially lighter. the steering, it's just a Hail Mary, really, it is. Segment best steering of any SUV I've tested, and I've now driven basically all the performance SUVs on the market, so I think I'm in a good position to make the call. And compared to the Jag, which just has that slightly heavier, slightly less communicative steering rack, the Stelvio just tells you everything. You can feel the front tires in the era of electric power steering. That's crazy. And that steering is delivered through a really lovely small steering wheel, a little bit of Alcantara on the wheel, but just in the 9 3 grip, so it's not overdone. You're looking at beautiful analog dials, and it's just any input on the wheel at all generates an incredibly intuitive response. Bang on, bang on. So many rivals would do well to copy the Stelvio Quadrifoglio's steering. Yeah, the Jag's almost there. This just tells you more. As you can probably see in here, this thing's like riding an Italian stallion horse or something like that, because you're just bucked around more, you know. While the Jag uses its extra 200 kegs or so to marvelous effect, ironing out imperfections in Australian back roads beautifully, the Stelvio just gets tossed about by those same imperfections. Now, that's a shame, because the Giulia Quadrifoglio has this trademark suppleness to it that makes it one of our favourite sports sedans, and was a primary reason why it got the win against the BMW M3 in our comparison of that pairing recently. Now, some of the suppleness carries across to the Stelvio, particularly at lower speeds in urban areas. It's really lovely, but here on this relatively challenging road, I won't lie, you can feel the suspension's having to work. You know, we've got slightly smaller wheels on this car than the Jag. We've still got a very sophisticated adaptively damped suspension, but it's just not able to round off those edges as kind of effortlessly. It's not bad. It's definitely more livable than the X3 M, which is just ridiculous. But, you know, the Jag is, well, the Alfa I should say, is just a little bit more hard edge, definitely. I say a little, it's clearly more hard edge than the Jaguar. It's also louder in the cabin, you know, so it feels sportier as a result. And I think the question is, like, what do you want to be able to do with this car? For me, it's about grand touring quickly. If you're actually going to track your SUV, okay, I mean, I think the Stelvio would be the way to go for that, definitely. But I'd also just buy a Giulia GTA or whatever. There's no GTA of the Stelvio, which would have been kind of cool, but also unnecessary. So I respect Alfa Romeo for not going that way. The brakes, unusual brake pedal feel in the Stelvio Quadrifoglio. Everyone says it, but the brakes are fairly hair trigger on both of these SUVs here. Neither of them have carbon stoppers, just really big discs and performance pads. But they work. I love the little tweak from the rear end. You just bleed in a little bit of throttle on corner exit and it reminds you it's so rear biased. It may be all drive, but yeah, you can fundamentally feel a huge amount of drive being pushed to the rear, fed through the locking or limited slip diff. Both of these cars have one. Just really puts the drive to the road nicely and just slurs that gear shift. I should say, with the modes, we've got DNA, all-weather, or advanced efficiency. I think it's all-weather, natural, dynamic, and then there's race mode too. Dynamic you can have with soft dampers, which is the way to go, but then the body control does get a little relaxed. There's not the individualization that you have on the Jag. There's no perfect setting, particularly because dynamic then gives you this heavy steering. I'd prefer natural, but with dynamics engine response, but you can't have it in a Stelvio. You just can't. What you can have though is great seats, lovely steering and steering wheel, lovely instruments, and just a lovely little driver's SUV, this one. I'd kind of prefer it was a Giulia wagon, like lower, but you can't have that either. And as far as SUVs go, this is a very, very special one. One of the great things about the facelifted Jaguar F-Pace is how Jaguar were able to really successfully lift the appearance and the appeal of this interior. And I mentioned that when I reviewed the standard F-Pace a few months ago, which you can find on our channel. And here in the SVR, a few things get changed to remind you this is the performance version, but most things are left alone, which is great. I think this is a personal taste thing, but I don't kind of need every single bit of trim in a performance car to be like, I'm sporty. Sometimes being like luxury sports is enough, and that's exactly the balance the F-Pace SVR strikes. This is a classy interior, particularly the way this car's been specified with the oyster and black two-tone metal accents. Looks and feels really good. You know, we don't have too much like outrageous contrast stitching or anything, so it kind of still has that luxury feel, and it pairs really nicely to the Atacama orange special vehicle operations factory order paint. Now the orange is $11,000, but the 22-inch wheels that sit beneath it are pretty reasonable at $1,600. This interior combination is included though. You don't have to pay any more to get what you see here. And the seats are very cool. Okay, the seats are racy, but they're also super comfortable, and they're not too firm, you know? So we actually still have adjustable side bolsters here, which means the F-Pace SVR can fit people of varying body sizes. There's four-way lumbar in your back. You know, it feels good, and they also have seat heating and cooling, despite the fact the centers are actually suede. You don't usually see that cooled, which is nice. You do that via the control panel down here for the climate, which is kind of half real, half touch, but it didn't annoy me, so it works pretty well. And then we have the great Pivi Pro touchscreen here. Really nice upgrade to the touchscreen. Not only is it bigger, it's also way snappier because there was mainly an upgrade to the computing power behind it. Sadly, no wireless Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, so you've got to plug in to use that functionality. But when you do, you get this huge canvas for CarPlay. Waze is massive but high resolution, so you can just see more of the map. You can see more podcasts and songs on the screen. It's really well done, as is the digital driver display. You can put a full map there. The graphics aren't quite as cool as, say, an Audi SQ8 or something, but they still look good. Love the tachometer and speedometer display, though. They look as good as an analog screen. It's just super bright and high resolution. New steering wheel for 2021 for the F-Pace. The SVR gets this kind of crosshatch pattern, and we also get capacitive touch buttons that sometimes work, but sometimes they need a really big stab in order to get it going. But the central hub looks really cool. Just such a little SVR badge down here. And in terms of practicality, we've got wireless charging. That's like $400. That should be standard. We've got cup holders, another little phone holder here, bits of odds and ends storage, and nice little tray to come over it. In this center box, we've got a USB-C and a standard USB. That's felt lined, and you can get huge water bottles in the doors. Last thing I'll mention is the panoramic sunroof that does open up, runs the full length of the car, but again, you've got to pay for it, over $4,000, so that's a pricey option, that one. I really like the back seat of the F-Pace SVR because it pretty much does everything well. Firstly, it's spacious, which you'd hope because this SUV does measure the best part of 4.8 meters in length, but I have headroom, despite the sunroof, I have legroom, and I have toe room, plus I have shoulder room. I think you could get someone in the center if you really had to. They're just not going to be super comfortable. There is a big hump in the floor, and because of JLR's attention to detail, the back seats actually mimic the shape of the front seats. So little kids are going to freaking love that, and I love it too, because at heart, I guess I'm still a little kid. Now, I also love the attention to detail of the fact that the back of these very sporty front seats is leather, and it's stitched, and the tops of the doors is also leather. So this is why I kind of think for like 142 grand before you start adding options, the F-Pace SVR actually feels like quite a bit of car. Like, I'm not trying to say 142 grand is cheap or that everyone can afford it, but I've tested much more expensive cars that don't have an interior anywhere near as nice as this. Apart from one point, which is that this door grab here, the less said about that, the better, but it's the only door grab in the car that's making that noise. Otherwise, we have air vents, we've got rear seat heating, we've got a 12-volt socket, and then down here we've got nothing else. So there's no extra USB ports in the back. You'll have to piggyback off mum and dad, basically. However, we've got an armrest with 2 cup holders. We got map pockets in the seats. So all in all, pretty well kitted out. Jumping now into the front seat of the Alfa Romeo Stelvio Quadrifoglio, the first thing that strikes you is how much smaller this car feels. They're about the same length, but the width is hugely different. The Stelvio is 12 centimeters narrower than the F-Pace, and you're absolutely going to notice that kind of difference. You're sitting closer to the passenger, but also it feels more hemmed in here. Really large frames might find they don't completely fit. For myself though, it's nice and comfortable. But as you can immediately see, the bolstering on these seats in the Stelvio is more aggressive than the sporty buckets in the Jaguar F-Pace. And that's before you go to the option on the Stelvio of full carbon Recaros, which are really tight, and even I struggle in those. So I'd probably stick with these standard seats that are comfortable and good looking. Unfortunately, they only come in black, and this interior is like dark, particularly after coming out of the nice like half cream interior in the Jag. But it's a nice black. It's a dark gray. It's got kind of leather and suede, and we've got green and white stitching, all very Alfa Romeo 4-leaf clover kind of effect. It all makes sense. And we look at this gorgeous steering wheel with these column mounted paddle shifters which stay in the same position when you're cornering, and they just feel beautiful. They're just real metal, awesome. The hub isn't quite as small and delicate as it is in the Jag, but we have proper mechanical buttons, so they actually work every time. And we have a little Manatino start-stop button on the steering wheel. That's a party trick I still quite like. And then we have analog gauges, all very different to the Jaguar. A bit like the Giulia M3 comparison I did recently, where I had a lot of nice things to say about the analog aspects of the Giulia's character, and really all of that carries across to the Stelvio because these two cars are virtually identical inside. Now, the middle screen can't do anywhere near as much as the Jag's fully digital instrument cluster, but if that doesn't bother you, doesn't faze you, then this is a really nice instrument pack. Over here, of course the screen is smaller, but it's nicely organized. It's got touch capability and we have a rotary dial, which the Jag doesn't have. The dial works well. The fonts are clear and crisp. I don't think the system is as sophisticated or as modern as the one in the Jaguar, but it works okay. And it's still got wired Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, just like the F-Pace. The Harman Kardon stereo in this car is good. It's just that the Meridian system in the Jag is great, but my tunes sounded pretty good in both cars. The trim here is carbon fiber. Real carbon fiber though, with a little gloss lacquer over it. It does look good. You can tell the difference between fake and real, big time. And then we do have leather covering the tops of the doors on the dash, so it does feel quite high quality. One old school USB port here. We got cup holders, wireless charging, standard, not $400. And underneath here, we've got a USB-C port, an old style USB port, and a 12 volt, all flock lined, all very nice. Armrest is in about the right spot, not adjustable though, like that in the Jag, which is a nice feature. We got this kind of textural knee pads here. Door bins, a little bit on the small side, but you learn to live with it. So I think the difference is here, it's more analog, it's darker, and it's a little more driver focused in that the cabin feels tighter. Quite a different car. Let's have a look at the second row. So what's life like here in the back of the Stelvio Quadrifoglio? Well, pretty dark, particularly if you have the sunblind closed as I do now, but it's just dark, dark, dark. The privacy glass is dark as well. So if you've got little kids and your aim is to keep the sun off their face, this is the car for you. But the Jag is just that much brighter and airier. So it's a completely personal choice, basically what you prefer. What's important though is that space is really good back here actually. 6 foot, I've got another inch of headroom, legroom's good, toe room's good, and you actually would fit someone in the middle here a little more successfully than the Jag, I think, but that's partially because the hump in the floor is lower, but also because we've just got a conventional rear bench back here. Alfa Romeo haven't done anything particularly cool with styling the back seats to sort of mimic the ones in the front, but we still do have the nice mix of leather and suede. We've got the double stitching in the 4-leaf clover colors. We've got air vents. They look good, they just feel a little bit plasticky, to be honest. But beneath them, we've got controls for the heated outboard seats, but also a pair of old style USB ports, but they're lit, so you're not kind of banging around, scratching up the plastic with a cable. You can actually see where you're putting it. I really like that. Map pockets on the backs of the front seats, leather up on the doors, and clip down armrest with 2 cup holders and sort of like a phone slot or something. So in terms of space and amenities, it's a much of a muchness. Moving around to the back of these two SUVs, the Stelvio, it has a clean design, beautiful quad pipes. If anything though, I actually reckon the Alfa Romeo badge could have been bigger. I was driving the Jaguar recently behind the Stelvio on the highway and I was like, man, that just looks tiny when you're a couple of car lengths behind. I don't know, maybe the trend of bigger and bigger and bigger badges is kind of rubbing off on me. Anyway, let's open the boot and have a look at the 525 litre capacity. You get a power door. This one's creaking a bit, but it gets out of your way quite quickly. And it has one of those sort of Mazda style blinds that gets out of your way, but is still fixed. So even when the boot is closed, your stuff is away from prying eyes. Now it may have the smaller of the 2 boot leader ridges in this comparison, but it's well packaged because as you can see, our biggest suitcase gets underneath the cargo blind turned vertically. That's actually relatively rare. And you can slide it out pretty easily because there's absolutely no lip. And then between the luggage runners here, you won't find a spare wheel. You will find a tire inflation kit. Not unusual with such large wheels, I suppose, but definitely worth considering. And we do have remote releases for dropping the back seats. Now, kind of pivotal to the boot space issue here is that the Stelvio is quite a lot smaller than the Jaguar F-Pace. It's 5 centimeters shorter and it's a massive 12 centimeters narrower. But I think that says more about how the F-Pace is just enormous. Enormously wide at least. Over 2 meters wide, which is huge. But it just doesn't feel that way on the road as I was mentioning before. Now, love this orange paint on this particular car. Really pops to me, although a lot of people have also loved the white Stelvio visually. We've got more integrated tailpipes here, but again, quads really singing their song. The F-Pace had got these restyled tail lights recently in the 2021 facelift, and then we just have this nice little subtle SVR badge. And I think if you actually debadged it, there'd be very little on this car, apart from those huge quads, to clearly identify it as the fast one, which I like. Power tailgate opens up to reveal 793 litres of space. And as you can see, ooh, no, we cannot get our biggest suitcase under the cargo blind. So that means I have to do some reshuffling here, because in something with this much performance, you want your bags to fit snugly, or else they're going to be rolling around and annoying the crap out of you on a road trip or something like that. But I think it goes to show that you've got to look beyond the bare number, right? 793 is definitely bigger than 525, but in reality, there's just not that much in it. However, we also have remote releases to drop those back seats. We got a 12-volt socket, we got a cargo hook, we got another little net. We don't have the adjustable load rails that are really great in the Stelvio. And underneath this boot floor though, we've got a temporary space saver spare. Not as good as the full size, but given the mammoth brakes on this car, even having a temporary spare is good. Now, unlike the Alfa, we don't have a control around the back here to lock the car. So all we can do is close the tailgate, and then we have to lock it separately. No big deal, but nice attention to detail on the Alfa. These two cars have a lot of similarities, but where some differences start to really open up is in the running costs, because one of them is significantly cheaper to run for 5 years than the other. And that starts with servicing, and the main difference comes from the fact that the Jaguar has a service plan that you can prepay for enormous savings, whereas the Alfa Romeo doesn't have a prepaid pack. You've just got to pay a la carte, and it's much more expensive for every single visit. So the Jaguar's plan covers 5 years and 130,000 kilometers of scheduled servicing, and it's priced at $3,750, which is quite fair for a seriously high performance SUV. Whereas the Alfa, it just has annual visits of 1 year or 15,000 Ks, and the first 5 of those, covering 75,000 kilometers, adds up to $6,644, so almost $3,000 more expensive over 5 years to service the Alfa Romeo. The next problem for the Alfa comes up with warranty, which is because the brand just inexplicably persists with a 3-year, 150,000 kilometer warranty in Australia. All very nice that you could drive your Stelvio Quadrifoglio for 50,000 kilometers per year within the warranty period, I guess, but up against the 5-year unlimited kilometer warranty of the Jaguar F-Pace SVR, or something like an AMG GLC 63, which also has a 5-year warranty, it's just that much harder to take a punt on an otherwise awesome car. In terms of fuel consumption, these two are about the same. The Jaguar is rated to be a little bit thirstier on the government regulated combined cycle, but in practice, in our testing, both of these cars use around 15 litres per 100 Ks, less than that if most of your mileage is done on the highway, and more of it if you're tapping into the performance characteristics of the engine on the daily. So that brings us to the need for a verdict. Well, what a delight it is to host a comparison of two excellent cars. Both of these super SUVs set out to do it better than the Germans do it, and I think they succeed, partially because the GLC 63 and the X3 M have just leaned so far into athleticism that they're not particularly comfortable to drive every day. And ultimately, you have to be able to drive these cars every day, because if you're only buying it to drive it on the weekend for a fast blast or a track session, you shouldn't be buying an SUV anyway. So these have kind of got to be able to do it all, and both the Stelvio Quadrifoglio and the F-Pace SVR do that. And in some ways, I know this is only speaking relatively, but they are like performance bargains. Both coming in at under 150 grand, they have amazing breadth of ability, amazing talent, and incredible engines to be priced under 200,000, in my opinion. But one of these cars comes out on top, and for me, it's the F-Pace SVR. And before any Alfa Romeo fans get angry in the comments about bias, just go and watch my comparison of the M3 and the Giulia recently, where the Giulia easily won. I love Alfa Romeos. It's just that Jaguar have obviously studied the Stelvio Quadrifoglio very closely. The Alfa still has better steering, no doubt about it. But the ride, the visceral engine in the F-Pace is just one step further again, not to mention that it's also cheaper to buy and cheaper to run and has a longer warranty, all of which should be concerns if you're looking to buy a luxury SUV. That's just my opinion though. I'd happily live with either of these cars. Very keen to know your opinion. Drop it down below the video in the comments. While you're there, make sure to hit subscribe and the notification bell. And as always, thanks for watching Chasing Cars.